For the 2018 True Grit Epic, I decided to humor my friends at Lauf. They were a title sponsor of the race, and so I told them I'd race one of their forks. It's not that I don't like their fork, I do, but that meant I would have to ride a hardtail. And this is a notoriously tough, very rough, very rocky, full-on mountain bike race, and it's a 50 miler. It's part of the NUE series. So I figured, what the heck, if one of their reps can race the Lauf True Grit gravel bike at this thing, surely I could race a mountain bike with their fork, right? So I chose the Pivot Less and paired it with Lauf's TR Boost fork, which gets a whopping 60 millimeters of travel. Let's start with the bike. The Pivot Less hardtail is, like every pivot, a nearly perfectly engineered piece of rideable machinery. This particular model was their first hardtail, and the name is a play on the fact that it actually has no pivots. Get it? Pivot Less. A first for the brand when it came out. What it does have is a swappable dropout system that lets you run it geared or single speed and adjust your chainstay length slightly to accommodate either setup. That's both a pro and a con here. If you want to run a single speed setup, then it's a very big pro because it's a well-designed part with 18 millimeters of stepless adjustment. But if you're planning to add gears, it's a con because it adds a lot of weight. The frame weight on our scales was 1,559 grams with all hardware, excluding the through axle. That's not light for an XC race bike. Comparable high-end offerings are often at or well under 1 kilogram, which puts the Pivot at a big disadvantage in the weight war. That said, as far as sliding dropouts go, this is probably the most beautiful and stealthy system out there, and one of few on a production carbon fiber frame. And that being said, knowing Pivot, our hunch is it's only a matter of time before they either commit to making this a single speed frame or offer a race-tuned, gear-specific hardtail that comes in at a more competitive weight. Barring a little bit of difficulty running the rear brake hose over on the non-drive side during setup, I really only have one other gripe about the Less, and that is cable rattle. The dropper seat post cable rattled incessantly, exacerbated by the generous gap at the entry port. While this makes for easier installation, it gives the cable plenty of room to move. My electrical tape fix didn't really solve the problem because it would work its way out, and most of the noise was coming from the housing rattling around inside the down tube anyway. This is an easy enough fix. There's an entry port under the down tube that would allow you to slide a foam insulation tube over the housing. But I didn't have time to do this before my race, so I had to hear it through all 50 miles. Or I could have used the alternate port, which has a bolt-on cover plate that would help secure the housing and allow it to be pulled tight inside the frame. This one's designed for front shifter housing, but with most of us running 1x nowadays, it pretty much goes unused. That might have reduced the rattle a little, but I still think the best option would be to sleeve the hose inside the frame. As a whole, the Pivot Less lives up to the brand's reputation for making stiff, high-performance bikes. Founder Chris Kakalis will always err on the side of safety, performance, and durability over gram counting, and this bike is a perfect example of that. Basically, this frame will take everything that you've got and deliver it straight to the trail to make you faster. It'll also take everything the trail has and deliver it right back to you. That's how stiff it is. But if you are looking for something that you know will last years and years, the Pivot Less is worth a look for a race bike. Handling is snappy, sprints are strong, and if there's a weak link in your race bike, this is not going to be it. Now, let's talk about the fork. Honestly, this was the wrong fork for that race. I love Lauf, I love their forks, but this thing was outgunned with just 60 millimeters of travel out in the Utah desert. If you're familiar with Moab or you've seen pictures of the big rocks and drops, the stuff in St. George is very similar, and unfortunately this fork just could not handle it, but it wasn't designed to. Functionally, the fork performed flawlessly, soaking up as much of the big hits and chatter as it could. It's laterally stiff and it kept the bike tracking exactly where I pointed it. For smoother courses, it's a great lightweight alternative. The TR Boost fork weighs in at 1,042 grams, which is more than 300 grams less than the next lightest mass market cross-country suspension fork we've weighed. It's also a much simpler, maintenance-free option than those forks, which means it takes away a lot of the excuses anyone riding full rigid bikes have for not doing a little something to save their wrists. The composite leaf springs are good for millions of cycles, and there's a bottom-out bumper to prevent damage in the rare instances when you hit something hard enough to reach it. The most common question revolves around damping and the lack of it. Yeah, this fork will bounce just a little when you're out of the saddle screaming toward the finish line, but that's about the only time you'll notice it. And even then it's minimal. The working travel range for this fork is really only about 40 millimeters. It takes a lot to get much past that. So the light compressions from standing the pedal aren't moving it that much. That also means it's not rebounding very far, so the lack of damping is simply not an issue. Here's what it boils down to. For the right conditions, the Lauf trail fork can be the right choice. For the True Good Epic, it was not. But it's a great product. For more words and photos on these products, head over to bikerumor.com for the full recap.